Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Nikki, can you hear me okay? I'm just going to give people a moment to fill into the room. All right. All right. My name is Raheem Thawer. I am a social worker and psychotherapist. I have presented at Sex Down South in the past, and I'm so excited to be here again today. Except today I'm joining you from Johannesburg. So I wasn't originally going to present, but I got a lovely nudge from Marla asking me to return this year, and I was quite honored to be asked. So today what I want to talk about is the concept of envy. It feels to me like in the last few years, it's become really popular to talk about shame. Brene Brown did a good job of really, taking us to shame and helping us talk about it. And I also did a presentation on shame a couple of years ago when I came to Sex Down South. And so I thought, let's go through some of the other difficult emotions and see what comes up. Oh, excuse me. So here's what we're going to talk about today. I want to distinguish between envy and jealousy. Those often get confused and are often used interchangeably, but we'll be making a particular distinction. And then I want to talk about the different kinds of envy. Is there like a healthy, benign, no big deal envy? Is there a malicious, contemptuous, hostile kind of envy? And then is there something that's kind of dispositional about envy? Are some people, do they just have a tendency toward envy? And where does that tendency come from? What is it made up of? Is it dissatisfaction with life? Is it being low energy? Is it not having a ton of opportunities, etc.? We'll talk about activators or triggers for envy. So where does your envy show up? In social and sexual situations? And then how do you protect yourself, or what are your natural defenses against envy? And what does it feel like? And how do we manage when we're envied by others? All right. So envy versus jealousy. I don't know if anyone is able to unmute themselves and just share or speak to give me a bit of, to help me out here. How would you define the difference between these two things? You could even put it into the chat box. Well, since I'm not sure if people can do that or if they're going to, I'll just go ahead and make the distinction myself. So I often think about jealousy as being a reaction to the threat of losing somebody. Now, it doesn't mean, we often talk about jealousy in the context of relationships, and it's not just romantic relationships, right? It could be a mother or a father giving more attention to one sibling versus another. That could cause jealousy. It could be a teacher or an employer that gives more celebration, more reward, more acknowledgement to one person over another. When you are in a romantic relationship and your partner devotes a certain amount of affection to someone else, and you feel like that affection is being taken from you, it's not in addition to what you receive, that is also an example of jealousy. So in all those examples of jealousy, we're talking about something we already possess, some kind of relationship and it feels threatened by a third person. So almost always when we're talking about jealousy, we're talking about a triad, a group of three people. Whereas when we talk about envy, we're usually talking about two people. So envy is dyadic. Now, beyond it being dyadic, beyond it being about just two people, what makes envy unique, right? It's usually a reaction to lacking something. Now, we all experience envy. Does that mean we're lacking things? Not necessarily. It's also a subjective evaluation of what we think we don't have or what we think we're lacking. So we often feel envious, and you'll have to tell me where you feel that in your body, maybe in the chat box. We often feel envious when someone else possesses something we want or we wish we had. This often looks like things that are hard to change. It could be achievements. It could be somebody's height. It could be somebody's friendship network. It could be their sexual prowess. It could be their popularity. It could be a number of things. So the idea here is that I see somebody else and they possess something, friendships, a six-pack, etc. And I start to feel like I wish I had that. And not just I wish I had that, because that's like longing and dreaming, but I actually feel like I don't have the thing that they have. And I want that. So envy is like coveting. And coveting is to long for or to really want something. And I think the language of coveting is interesting because in a biblical sense, wanting something somebody else has or encroaching on something that they possess is seen as sinful in some religious contexts. So I think it's really interesting to talk about envy because I don't think we're always allowed to. I think culturally, our conversation around envy has been silenced because it's deemed to be inappropriate. It's deemed to be sinful. All right. Now, envy is an emotion on its own, but I think sometimes it's really hard to distinguish between envy and jealousy. And of course, sometimes there is an overlap, right? So, for example, if my partner is finds someone else attractive, I could feel jealous. I could feel like that other person has something that I don't, right? And I could feel like my relationship is being threatened, or my partner's his gaze is being taken. It's being occupied by someone else. So in fact, I'm losing something. There's an example of jealousy. But if I compare myself to the person that my partner is attracted to, that's when envy might come up. So this isn't clear cut at all, how I've made the distinction in the last bullet point, but sometimes it helps me conceptualize and distinguish the two. So when I think about envy and something I lack or wish I had or wish I could possess, it could take me to a place of sadness, or like grief. Damn, I wish I had that thing. But jealousy takes us to another place of sometimes deception, anger, wanting to be controlling, wanting to intervene. Um, it leads us to do something often to disrupt something in the triad. Okay, so that's how I'm going into this conversation about envy and distinguishing it from jealousy in these very particular ways. Now, I'm going to ask everyone to pull out their cell phones. On your cell phone, I'd like you to open up a browser and go to ahaslides.com/ in caps my envy. If you'd prefer, you could also open up your phone's camera and click on open the camera and use that QR code. We're going to do a quick survey, and you're going to get a chance to participate in a way that's fairly anonymous and will allow us to just think through envy in a particular way. So some people have gotten into it already. I'm going to give folks a few more minutes. So far, I'm seeing about 8 people in that room, but we have 64 people who are attending this presentation. So I'll just give people a moment um, to enter it. Participate only if you're comfortable, but of course, I'd love for you to participate. All right, just checking the room. All right, the numbers are slowly climbing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share my screen so that you can see the survey results live. All right, we'll just give it a second to load. So the first question is, when I experience envy, it's often connected to another person's, and you can pick as many responses as you want. Physical appearance, achievements, financial wealth, social media popularity, their possessions, like car, necklace, Gucci bag, whatever, superior qualities, like I guess things to do with their personality, their networks and friendships, career, popularity, family, or structural and systemic advantages. All right. I think all the folks who are going to answer have, and anyone else that wants to join in can do so. The link is at the top of this slide. All right. So I'm not surprised at all at some of these results. Um, you know, there's some things that people can work at and they can achieve, right? And so when it comes to working at something, sometimes our envy is easier to manage, right? Because if somebody won an award or they're doing well in their career, we sometimes think, oh, okay, well, we do some self talk and we say, well, my career choice is different, or I'm doing well in my field, right? And we're able to think about, we have a sense of control over changing our future outcomes. The things that we can't change make envy really, really difficult. And it's important to me in this conversation to not just talk about envy as an interpersonal experience or as a social emotion, but also to really acknowledge that when we look at other people and what they possess, some of what we envy is structural and systemic. So, for folks in the audience who are not sure about what we mean by that, what I'm talking about here is advantages that other people around us might have as a result of, um, you know, uh, the color of their skin, the economic group, the neighborhood that they were born into, their uh, abilities, their sexual orientation or gender identity. Usually, when people belong to some kind of dominant group, we might feel envious toward them. And then there might be people in our own marginal group, marginalized or minoritized group, that we feel envious of for other reasons, right? Maybe they have more social accolades. All right. The other questions are going to be a bit more simple. They're going to be more agree, somewhat, or disagree. So I feel some level of envy every day. All right, feel free to respond any moment. All right, folks, we're gonna have to up the participation a little bit. There's 60 some odd folks in the room, and um, we've got only 7 people participating in the survey. So I'd really like to encourage more people to go to ahaslides.com/my envy and jump into this room. All right, so a number of people are saying disagree. That's great. This speaks to dispositional envy. Dispositional meaning you just gotta have this tendency as a result of your life experiences or your personality or difficult things that have happened to you where you might every day feel a little bit envious. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but this tendency could be something that leads to just low energy and dissatisfaction. So, if you experience it in large amounts regularly, it's something to think about. It's something that might need attention. All right, I'm going to move us to the next one. And everyone that's in the survey room, I'd love for you to respond. So, when I envy others, I focus on how I can become equally successful in the future. Agree, disagree, or somewhat. All right, I'm going to wait for more than one person to respond. Also, I guess I'm bombing with this. Okay, lots of people are saying somewhat. I appreciate that. Okay, and then one person saying disagree. Two people saying disagree. Great. So one might argue that when we think about what we can do relative to other people, this is more of the benign kind of envy. It's healthy in a way. All right. I often wish for popular or attractive people to lose their social advantages. Agree, disagree, somewhat. It's hard to be this vulnerable, isn't it? But remember that I can't see your name, so your participation is anonymous. Okay, so the people who say somewhat and disagree, I'm guessing for you folks, you really think there's a feeling that comes up of envy, maybe a bit of resentment, and then you think to yourself, nah, let them have what they have, and I'm focusing on what I'm doing or what I have. It's also very natural and normal to want somebody else to come down a few notches, right? So we're not judging it. That could just be a natural response. Envying others motivates me to accomplish my own goals. What do folks think? Well, we've got one disagree and one somewhat. So I'm guessing it really depends on who the person is. Oh, we're getting more responses. I'll wait for them to come in. Okay, so this is a good sample size here. We've got most people disagreeing, and then some people agreeing or saying somewhat. So this makes me think about what feels in reach relative to who we're comparing ourselves to, right? If I compare myself to a celebrity, it might not be realistic. If I compare myself to a sibling, things might be a bit more in reach. When someone has something I want, I fantasize about taking it away from them. Agree, disagree, or somewhat. And if it's not taking it away from them, it could also be having it. I've gone to spaces before where I've seen men look a particular way, and I do have this fantasy that, like, what would their life be like if they didn't have that feature, if they didn't have those arms, or they didn't happen to be that tall? How would they do without that? So you can see there's a bit of contempt there, but I'm going to say that it is like it happens. So I'm just going to say it's in the realm of normative responses. All right, I'll move to the next one. I feel ill toward people I envy. What do folks think? I wonder if there's a hesitancy to answer this one. Disagree? Now, as people are talking, responding to this, I would say that as much as for a lot of folks, um, religious institutions and teachings haven't been pleasant or have been dogmatic and exclusionary. Lots of people who are like who experience being erotically marginalized also are skeptical of religious institutions. I do think that the double-edged sword with envy and coveting is that Judeo-Christian religions have taught us um, not to talk about envy, which is not helpful, but they've also told us not to feel ill toward people who possess something we don't. And I wonder if there's something virtuous about that teaching. There's something helpful about that teaching. My envious feelings cause me to dislike the other person. You know what? As people are responding, I'll just tell a bit of a story about it. I had a friend for a long time who I went to bars with, I did a lot of things with. But as we became, we separated or we went in different directions, I started to see them as more my competitor. And then when they did well, I felt envious. And my envy took me to a place of disliking them. So that's an example of what that can look like. And it looks like there's an equal distribution here of agree and disagree. My envious feelings lead me to find ways to get closer to the other person. So you're like, I envy you, I'm going to be your friend, or I am going to hit on you, or we are going to have sex together, or et cetera, et cetera. So most people are saying disagree, and then about a third are saying agree or somewhat. Um, and so I think that's interesting. Being closer to the person you envy could be rewarding for your self-esteem, but not getting closer to them is a smart way to protect yourself as well. The bitter truth is that I generally feel inferior to others. Agree, disagree, or somewhat. Now, the thing about inferiority is nobody is actually inferior to another person, but we're often made to feel that way as a result of systemic and structural disadvantage and like specific experiences of trauma and exclusion. And when we feel inferior, what gets activated is shame, right? And if we struggle with shame, then it might be that we feel inferior in many contexts, and that makes us feel envious of people more regularly. All right, so lots of folks saying somewhat. I appreciate that. I think it's probably quite a nuanced conversation to be had. All right, I'll move to the next one. My envy is rooted in the pain of social disadvantages and inequity. You know, when I think about this particular statement, it's not about attributing all of my negative evaluations of myself to something systemic. And if I do that, I'm in a tricky place because then I can't control any outcomes or I don't feel like I have any personal agency. But on the other hand, if I think about what I'm envying in others, sometimes the attributes or the qualities that they have are typically ascribed to white European middle class people. And so I think that we need to think we can't lose our entire agency by saying everything is systemic, but also recognizing that systems have a big role to play in how we feel about ourselves and how we engage in a comparison with other people. And I actually quite like that. Most people have said agree in somewhat. It's great. It's frustrating to see other people succeed so easily. Think about this, like there's there's two camps. Like one, sometimes I think I've worked with a lot of people who are neurodiverse or neuroatypical, and they talk often about the challenges or the unique experiences of navigating social situations and dating, um, and they find it really frustrating that so many settings, online, virtual, and in person, are designed for normative, what's the word, neurotypical folks. Um, and so it can be really frustrating to see other people succeed so easily in a world that's designed for them. In another instance, you might feel frustrated seeing that someone else's tweet went viral and you've been tweeting for ages and they tweeted a stupid thing and it went viral. What the F? So that's a different kind of frustration that I think a lot of people experience. All right. Seeing other people's achievements makes me feel overlooked. Now, this is an interesting one. This is what I would call, and it's a bit of a clinical term, but it's not a diagnostic term. It's what I would call a narcissistic injury or a narcissistic wound, right? It's where me, who I'm putting out there, is just not being seen in the way I want. I feel like I'm being erased, or I feel like my experience or the things that I'm putting out there are being minimized. So there's a bit of a narcissistic wound. And that doesn't mean you're a narcissist. It just means we all have these kinds of wounds where our ego gets really bruised. I think about sibling rivalries, and they happen not just with your actual siblings, but also other people in the world who you think are really similar to you. And they feel like the right people to compare yourself to. And somehow they get a lot of sunshine and you don't get as much of the center stage. And so that would be an example of a narcissistic wound, right? And their achievement makes you feel overlooked. Seeing other people's achievements makes me feel resentful. I think more recently, I'm seeing already a couple of people are saying disagree. I'm starting to say, like, as part of managing envy, I'm starting to say, there's enough sunshine for everybody. I'm glad you got the gig. I'm glad you got the stage. I'm glad you feel like you're doing well. It's great that your relationship is going so well. It's so great that you've been able to figure out how to do this open poly thing. My last attempt didn't go so well, right? Part of how I also manage my envy around people's achievements is a bit of a reality check. So I do self-talk that's kind of like, hey, there's nothing wrong with them doing well, but I can't compare my insides to their outsides. And that helps me, right? Everyone's got complex insides. And so the people who are doing well, or they have they show on Instagram something that they've achieved. I might feel envious, but I have to remember they're showing the reels, they're showing the film, they're showing the outsides. I can't compare it to my insides. It's not a fair comparison. Feelings of envy torment me. Now, if feelings of envy torment you, this would be something that you'd have to take a closer look at, um, because it might mean that envy is a constant barrier for you to do things that you want to do, particularly when it comes to social and sexual things. So people are saying somewhat, and other people are saying disagree. So it's something for us to think about, like in terms of how intense is it, how present is it. Now, this is the last question. It's a bit more complicated. You can pick multiple answers. In a sexual context, I experience envy in relation to others, relationship models. So, them being able to maintain or be in monogamous relationships or poly relationships or open relationships. Maybe you feel envious of the number of partners others have, the frequency of their sex. Maybe you're in a relationship or a particular relational arrangement and you envy others' singleness, others' physical features, other people's ability to engage in sexualized drug use. Maybe you're envious that they can use drugs and pair that with sex and you have a low tolerance for that. Or maybe you feel envious that they're part of a community where they can pair sex and drugs. Um, are you envious of people's sexual networks and communities? Other people's sexual experiences or resumes or CVs? Perhaps you're envious of other people's sexual fluidity, that they're able to be with multiple people and multiple genders, and you wish that was you. Perhaps you're envious of other people's partners because they just seem to be more open minded and willing to try the things that you wish you could your partner would be willing to do. And finally, others' bravery or sense of adventure. So I'll give folks a moment to select what resonates with them. I think people are almost done answering. So if you want to take a screenshot or a photo of this just for future conversation, or you think it'll help you in a workshop in the future, you're absolutely welcome to. As I'm going to switch screens in a moment. All right. Welcome back to just me and no slides for a moment. I'm going to ask folks to get really comfortable with putting some things in the chat box because I'm looking for some reflections on what stood out for you or how any of that felt for you. If you forgot what it is that we were looking at or talking about, I'll put some of those statements back on that. I'll put them back on the screen for you. So they're on the screen, and I'm just going to be looking at the chat box to just read out some people's reflections, if you have any. Things that stood out for you, things that you hadn't thought about. Maybe you felt vulnerable in a way you didn't expect. All right. Someone says they like that survey. Thank you. All right. It doesn't look like many folks are participating via chat, so that's okay. That is absolutely okay. I am going to go back. I'm just going to keep talking and hopefully you enjoy my voice. So, envy in a sexual context, that was that last slide. And I wonder, and I've added a few things onto this, like, for example, envy with regard to access to sexual spaces. As a gay man, I know that, I can go to a sauna or a bathhouse where guys have anonymous sex. And I shouldn't just say as a gay man, as a cisgender gay man. And I know some of my transmasculine friends have been envious of my ability to access that space. And to be able to operate in a particular way because it has rewards for, I think they would think, hey, that would be fun. But also, if I were able to participate in that way, there would be particular rewards for my rewards for my masculinity, my gender experience. Some people do very well online, and so you might also experience envy about other people's sexual currency. I've hung out with friends before and peeked over at their grinder or their scruff, and I'm thinking, hey, what the heck? How come they've got so many messages, so many taps or fires or whatever it is? And I think, oh, I don't get that kind of response online. Then there's types of sex, which I think we ought to think about. I think a lot of us watch porn. I hope we do. I mean, if you don't, that's okay. But like how else do you spend an afternoon? Or your break between Zoom meetings. So I often think about as a gay man how much envy I have for other gay men who are able to be receptive partners, to be able to have receptive anal sex. Because it's something I can't just do as easily as I would like. I can't do it for as long as I would like. I can't do it with as many people as I would like. And part of that has to do with anxiety. Another part of that has to do with like IBS. And then another piece of that is just like circumstances. Um, but I often think, hey, how are these people able to just have anal sex so quickly, on demand, whenever, however? And that really activates my envy, right? So, what is it that I want that they possess? A kind of sexual availability, a kind of sexual versatility, um, a kind of sexual being that's able to emerge almost on command, um, yeah, on command. The other thing is duration of sex. I know lots of people talk about when they gather around brunch or they gather around for cocktails. Um, People often talk about, oh, I had the best sex of my life, or he fucked me all night, or we fucked all night, or we fucked here and then took a break and then went here and fucked in this other place. And I think as much as I think a lot of us are able to have that kind of experience. Um, Most of us, I don't think, are able to have that with everyone all of the time. And this idea of the mind blowing all night sex brings up a lot of envy for us. We definitely see that in porn. We certainly see that in TV. And I see it in cocktail and brunch conversation. And that's how it makes me think that, hey, are people just better? Are they having better sex than me, or do they have better stamina than I do, or are they lying? Sometimes I hope that they're lying. All right, I'm just going to go to the chat box because a few people have shared some of their reflections. So a person says, I hadn't realized how many of my feelings of envy are triggered by very specific areas. Yeah, thank you for that. It helped me evaluate my envy in a way that I never really have before. It was nice to see other people have similar feelings. We don't often talk about this topic, true. It was great getting to see the responses to the survey and to see the variation in people's experiences and to normalize more engagement with envy. Another person says, it helped me notice how envy isn't about the thing I'm envious of. It's about the social expectation that experience is more optimal or more valid than mine. Oh, absolutely. It's not about the thing. It's often about the person who possesses it and us wanting to be like them or wishing we could occupy a space in the world that's kind of like theirs. And it's met with a lot of um, idealization often as well, right? We assume that the person who has, let's say, for example, the person who's tall or the person who's really networked in the kink community or who knows how to do, who has like a success, who's known, as having a successful long-term poly relationship and is kinky. Like they're doing all of the things and we're kind of like, huh, I imagine the idealization comes with imagining that all other aspects of their life are amazing, right? And that's not necessarily true. And a couple of people are talking about kink in the chat box. So envy is part of kink, and if it's envy about other people who are kinky, that's one thing, but it's also envy as kink. So turning the energy of what might be brings up competition or resentment, converting it into excitement, and turning it into something that's part of a sexual scene. Yeah, that could be particularly interesting. So I want you to think about envy in a sexual context and how does envy interact with your sexuality and sexual experiences? And some people are starting to talk about that in the chat room. So that is, does envy motivate you to do things differently? Does it make you surround yourself with a particular kind of community? Have you said, I want to be open, I want to be poly, I want to be more sexually adventurous. I'm going to watch this kind of porn. I'm going to hang out with these kinds of people. I'm going to start going to conferences with these kinds of folks. That could be great. It might also, your envy might also make you feel inferior. It might also bring up shame. It might also make you resentful of your current partner or your current singleness, right? The envy might just also make you aware of what you don't have access to. So think for a moment, how does envy interact with your sexuality and your sexual experiences? I'm going to give a specific example. So let's say I'm online, I'm on Grinder, which is like a sexual, hookup app or networking app, if you will. Um, if I see people who have attributes that I don't possess, that I feel envious of, maybe behind a screen, I feel more emboldened to send them a tap or to send them a like. And maybe I'll go through and do that to every third person because I'm like, oh, he has a thing I wish I had. He has a thing I wish I had. Everybody has a thing I wish I had, right? So it could mean that I spread my energy really widely because my envy is so big. Or in an online context, my envy is allowed to expand and I don't feel so embarrassed about it. So I spread the net or I cast the net wide. How does that impact me? Well, it gives me a sense of adventure. It lets me be vulnerable, but I also maybe experience more rejection. It also means I'm taking chances, but if none of the people I'm envying uh, return alike, maybe I'm going to experience inferiority or my shame will be activated. I think when it comes to envy, it can also hold us back. And it's not just because envy and shame are so intimately connected, but it can be stifling if I'm looking for something someone else possesses. So let me rephrase that in a structural way. Let's say I'm looking for somebody who's tall and white, for example. I'm stifled not because I'm only focusing on those guys, but I'm stifled because I'm desexualizing other people that don't fit that category. And so when I'm in a sexual interaction or in a sexual encounter, my envy might lead me to focus more on performance instead of pleasure. Someone else might say, my envy leads me to chase other people, to court them, and to flirt with them and win them over, consensually, of course. And that's an example of how envy could be converted into something helpful or something fun. My question to you would be, how do you tend to manage your sexual envy? And you can share in the chat box, but if that's a bit more personal, so you don't necessarily have to. I would say that in present day, we our overall in North America, our mental health literacy has really increased over the last few years. What do I mean by that? Our language around basic things like anxiety and depression and shame have really increased as a result of TikTok, Instagram, and in some cases, statewide, province-wide, or national government projects that want us to know a bit more and want us to engage with our mental health in a particular way. So, as you think about what you're usually labeling as anxiety or social anxiety, you might consider what pieces of your social anxiety are made up or driven by envy, right? My social anxiety in in a setting of a lot of gay men could actually be, you know, two parts worried, like 2% worried that I have bad breath, and 98% um, about envy of other people. I could say, oh, I don't look like these people, or my body doesn't look like them, or nobody's looking at me, or these are the boys that are getting the attention. So I've already started talking about this, but different things are going to trigger your experience of envy in social and sexual settings. So some people call these triggers, I might call them activators, because triggers is also used in many different contexts of mental health. So let's think about the activators of our envy. Now, I think envy, like shame, is a social emotion. It doesn't just occur in a vacuum, right? Like if I feel envious, it's of someone else or something that they possess, right? So it's in relation to someone else. So I mentioned this earlier, but envy can often emerge from narcissistic wounds. This means feeling overlooked or feeling ashamed, feeling inferior. For some people, it could even be being in a classroom and sharing an answer, and somebody else who you feel a kind of competition with shares a slightly better answer, right? To a lot of people, they're like, oh yeah, who cares? It's just a classroom. We're just sharing. But people's egos operate in different ways, and they're going to be attuned to validation and subsequently invalidation in unique ways based on their context. So, any context where you feel inferior or ashamed, outperformed, sidelined, outlooked, those are situations where maybe you're experiencing a kind of narcissistic wound. Um, I'll give an example of this. So that's systemic and structural in nature as well. I'm thinking about going to a party. I'm invited to a house party. It's like a pre-drink, before people go to the bar, or some people will stay there all night and not go to any bar. And I'm invited by my friends. And I show up and I realize most of these guys are white. And I think, okay, whatever. I'm here doing my thing. I'm going to pour myself a drink. A lot of white people. Maybe I'll help myself to one of their drinks because it's owed to me. And I see another East Asian person and another South Asian person, and they're talking to really cute white guys. Now, I wonder if I will feel excited to meet the other racialized people, or I will be excited to meet other people outside those dyads, or if I feel both jealousy and envy. And my response to the envy is competition. Do I feel competition with other racialized people for the attention of the white person? And does the white person's attention or gaze to the other racialized people that are not me result in a narcissistic wound? It's interesting to think about. Because in this instance, I know how white supremacy is operating, but I also know that the tall white guy that's talking to the other racialized person hasn't specifically done anything wrong. But there's a kind of lateral competition and an internalization of the white gaze that activates my envy. And in this very particular situation, I'm seeing that I'm being overlooked. And so I experience it as a narcissistic injury or a narcissistic wound. So another activator, when I think about what it is a person has that I want, look, if I go to the suburbs and visit my family and they have really big packages of club soda and popcorn from Costco, I don't envy them. I don't. When I see them driving in SUV cars with a child seat there and a big trunk so that they can fit all of their Costco purchases in it, I don't really envy them, right? So envy really is going to depend on what my context is. Suddenly, if somebody who lives in the city that I know, who similar to me does not have suburban aspirations, if I see them as in my reference group, in my group of comparison, and they possess something um, that I want, or sorry, I'm more likely to compare myself and think about what I want that they have, right? So um, let's say suddenly a friend of mine gets their driver's license, or they get a promotion at their job. I've always said for a long time, I'm a social worker, I'm a therapist, you know, I'm not in it to make money. I didn't go into this profession to make money. Sometimes I'm lying because I see people that are the same age as me who are my friends who are working in the corporate world and making a lot more. And they have bigger things and nicer things. So, yeah, I feel envious at times. So, think about for a moment what envy looks like for you and who are the people in your reference group, your group of comparison that possess something desirable that you want. Maybe it is a six pack. Maybe it is just they don't deal with chronic illness, for example. You could be really envious of that. Here's an interesting example. I know I'm envious when I notice my own sadism. So, deriving pleasure from suffering or humiliation, not on others, but of others. What the heck am I talking about? So, having sadism is not about, like, it's not about inflicting pain on people necessarily, right? A sadistic quality or a sadistic experience can just be seeing someone have something taken away. So in the quiz, when we talked about, someone getting a demotion or having their attractiveness taken away, maybe they're being embarrassed, or maybe, they're evaluated more fairly or on multiple domains, suddenly you feel, they're not doing so well, and I'm feeling a bit good about this. You know, maybe it's a moment where you see somebody who you know is engulfed in so much privilege, and they're your friend and they're having a tough time, and you're there to support them. But the kind of pleasure you get from their suffering is not that you're happy that they're suffering, but you have a little bit of happiness because you feel affirmed that you're not the only person that struggles in the world. That you're kind of glad that, you know what, I'm glad that I now know that they also have a struggle. So let's think about what activates your envy, or how do you notice it showing up in social spaces? Do you take up more space? Do you take up less space? Do you dance in the center of the room? Do you drink more? Do you um, give yourself a role? Somebody will say, I'm just gonna be the helper at this party. Do you give yourself a specific role? Now, how do we protect ourselves against envy? Or, oops. So in psychodynamic therapy, defenses are just things that we do or we enact almost subconsciously to put some distance between us and another feeling that is hard to tolerate or is hard to manage. So envy actually activates a whole web of defenses. We would call affective orientations or feeling orientations or mood orientations. Here's all the things that can come up. So if I experience envy, because I think it's overwhelming or unacceptable or it's not productive, not helpful, I might convert it. I might defend against my envy or protect myself against envy by recoding it as motivation. Hey, I'm going to do what they're doing so I can be more like them. That could be one experience. Another one, and this is a big one, could be grief. Grief about things that I'll never have, things about inequity in the world, grief about maybe I'm comparing myself to someone else's relationship, and it might be grief about my own relationship losses. Sometimes it really is grief about like things that we don't necessarily think of, like non-death losses, right? When I talk about grief in this context, I'm even thinking about, I'll never be that tall, or I'll never have a dick size that's like this guy. And as a result, I'll never be able to participate in a sexual world in the way that he does. Or at least I won't be able to lead with the same kinds of things that he leads with. So, grief. Shame. Shame is about feeling embarrassed or inferior, right? Instead of feeling envious and feeling contempt or hostile towards someone else, I might turn it inward and think about, I might actually feel bad about feeling inferior. It's different than grief because I'm not mourning a loss or I'm not mourning something I don't have. I'm actually ruminating for a little while on what I wish I had. And I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself for not having those things. Grief and sadness also often go together, but so does vulnerability. If I'm aware of my envy, that means I'm often aware of my shame. And when I'm aware of those two things, I'm super vulnerable. So even if I'm trying to convert my envy into sexual excitement, a sense of competition, I want to court someone, I want to seduce someone, I'm still making myself quite vulnerable. If I'm tapping a bunch of people online, I'm making myself vulnerable to rejection, potentially. Now, some people say they defend against envy with gratitude. Now, nobody talks like that. No one says, I defend against envy with gratitude. Nobody. But they often talk about what other people have, and they think right away, or they take a moment and they think about the things that they feel thankful for, right? Now, if you use the self-talk that it's not helpful for me to compare someone else's outsides to my insides, then you get to think about a broader picture, right? That person possesses something that I would like, and I imagine my life could be better if I had that thing. But also, I have these other things. And the things that I do have, I don't know if that other person has or not. And I don't really want to give this up, the thing that I have. Maybe I have a good support network. Maybe I have good friends. Maybe I have a spiritual practice that really, really grounds me. And maybe I would choose that, or I want to feel gratitude for that over thinking about the things that I don't have. Perhaps you experience counter-identification. Now, counter-identification is something I experience a lot of, but also experience it as quite complex. So counter-identification means wanting to align myself with the opposite of the things that I feel envious of. So if other people have money, or there's something about, let's say if I spent a lot of years desiring white people, which I did, my counter-identification might mean that I'm trying to decolonize my desire. I'm mostly hooking up with brown and black people. And for me, that means creating like a subculture or an ethos in my own life that is against a dominant culture's teachings of who I should be and what I should desire. I think in the ways a lot of us resist capitalism, we're doing counter identification, right? If we say, I don't really need to buy a lot of stuff, I'm going to be more minimal, or I'm going to declutter, that could be an act of counter identification. Sometimes we can't tolerate our envy and we go in a more toxic direction, and we experience greed. So we compete, we work harder, we want it all. Now, the challenge is that from a capitalist systemic point of view, the people who are in a hamster wheel of envy and already have a lot of resources, they don't necessarily um, need to stop and grieve or sit with their shame or focus on gratitude or counter identification. They kind of can continue just being greedy and accumulating wealth or accumulating something, um, whether it's partners or accolades or whatever it is. And so for those folks, they're kind of in a dangerous place, relationship wise, because you can have a lot of things, but if you don't have the self-awareness to see how your envy is operating, it can be quite difficult to build like honest and deep relationships with other people. Envy can also lead to grandiosity. So that's like me saying, I feel threatened by you because of your credentials or because of how beautiful you are or because of um, the amount of receptive anal sex you're able to have. I mean, I would never say that out loud to anybody. It sounds outrageous. But let's say those are the things going on in my mind and they were activating my envy. I might respond with talking myself up and, talking about how fabulous I am, which, by the way, I am. But that kind of grandiosity about, where I've traveled or what I've done, it might be something I lead with as a defense. Some people are attracted to that kind of personality. Other people will be quite put off by it, right? So if you're thinking about how your defenses play out in your relationships, you might have a friend who struggles with shame and envy, and the way they defend against it is to be really grandiose, like they're never wrong, or they're the lead person of this, or they talk about all the fancy people they know, or the well-to-do people they know in a community. And I'm like, oh yeah, name dropping, grandiosity. They're operating in a world of other people that they're envious of, and they're comparing themselves to. Hostility. Sometimes we're very angry at the people we envy, and sometimes we have a right to be, but it's not always helpful in terms of furthering an interpersonal relationship. So if we're talking about 2 or 3 people or a group of people getting along or getting to know each other, hostility is not super helpful. If there's an entire group of people who, historically have had a lot of power and have abused it, yes, you could direct hostility toward a group, theoretically. But hostility rarely facilitates helpful interpersonal relationships. Sometimes envy has this mild kind of effect of allowing us to slip into adoration or aspiration. Oh, it seems nice to have that thing. And I think about it for a moment and I adore you and I adore the thing that you have. And then it is an aspiration or fleeting aspiration and then it's gone. I'm filled with warm feelings. I'm happy that you have the thing. I think about what it would be like if I had the thing and then it's done. For other people, those people who take aspiration seriously, these are the folks who are saying, I want to get closer to the person who has the things that I want. And so maybe one of their ways that they deal with envy is moving toward eventual possession. So I have the thing or I have proximity to the person who has the thing. Now, take a moment in this chat box. I'd love for you to name, how do you know, actually, sorry, I'm going to go back a slide. I'm open to any reflections. I'm just going to go to the chat box to see if anyone else is sharing things. Okay, someone says, when I get hung up on envy, my insecurity and my social anxiety are exacerbated. That makes perfect sense. That's something to a bit, but the person who wrote this is really speaking to it in a more succinct way. Thank you for that. Another person says, I relate this to what I think of as being a duck. The old saying, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it must be a duck. I've kind of embraced that to try to achieve what I want. So if I want something, I do try to act as if I already have it, walking and talking like the duck, Okay. And so there's like that defense to envy or protective mechanism is more, I would call that, I guess, performance, right? Um, in the hopes that one day I'll be a duck. Yep, although I answered differently in the poll, now that I frame it this way, I realize that I'm motivated by envy to a certain extent. Oh, I'm so glad you had that realization. Um, okay, I'm going to move back to the presentation. And sorry, I'm having a technical glitch here. So, what does it feel like to be envied by others? How do you know when it's happening? And does it make you uncomfortable? I started thinking about these questions when I was talking to a colleague of mine who's an academic. And when we talked about envy for a long time, he was focusing a lot on his own experience of envy and talking about it only in a structural way. What does that mean in a structural way? And that means he was only thinking about things other people have that he doesn't have as a result of class privilege, race privilege, economic privilege, uh, maybe normative attractiveness, this kind of thing. And then I said to him, well, if we chalk it all up to structural, what you're an academic. You have access to, language, credentials. And he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I said, no, 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 look, I'm not wanting you to be accountable in this moment. I'm wanting you to sit with the discomfort of what it feels like to be the object of envy. How do you know when it's happening? And does it make you uncomfortable? And he said, you know, in all honesty, I'm not sure when I'm being envied. I'm sure that I have been, but I don't always know when it's happening. And that's probably because I'm so wrapped up in my own envy of others and my own shame and preoccupied with my own like subject position in the world. I'm not often thinking about who might be just even looking up to me. And so I said, so would it make you uncomfortable if someone said they envied you? And he said, well, I think it would be flattering. And yes, uncomfortable. So let me know in the chat box if you feel like you would be comfortable or uncomfortable if you knew you were being envied by others. All right. So what can being envied come with? Being envied by others, how does it affect us? Combo both. All right. So being envied by others can come with a lot of things. So maybe it makes you feel increased self-confidence, right? You're like, I know that I'm hot shit. Or I've gotten a lot of compliments in this particular realm. And as a result, I feel confident about other people looking up to me, at least in this domain. Maybe it's me as a workshop facilitator. I've had people tell me, Raheem, I really like how you facilitate workshops. And so they look up to me or they envy me in a small dose, and that increases my self-confidence, right? If someone says they envy something else about me where I don't actually feel very competent or like I have a lot of experience, it doesn't actually increase self-confidence. It increases anxiety and imposter syndrome. If you are the receiver of a lot of loving admiration and positive gaze, you might be used to navigating social spaces in a way where a relationship partner might not. And so being envied by others could cause relationship strain, or it could cause jealousy. If you feel envious of your partner, so not the attention your partner gets, but envious of your partner and their accomplishments, you might regularly compare yourself to them, and that could cause some relationship strain. Some people, when they feel envious of partners, often it is about the other partner's sexual history and sexual CV, or how much money their partner makes. Being the target of evil eye. What the heck is evil eye? So, cross culturally, people experience envy. Envy is like experienced in a lot of cultures around the world. Um, but if you are envied, right, um, some cultures will talk about being the target of someone else's contempt. So you're showing off something you have, anything from food to jewelry to status, right? You're showing off your pride. You might become the target of someone else's contempt. And that, what's the consequence? The consequence of that is you have like, you bring bad fortune on yourself. Now, that's a very particular cultural conceptualization, but it does impact a lot of people. A lot of people do think about evil eye. So if you're being envied by others, I'm not surprised that you're not thinking about it or you're minimizing it, because you might have been taught that if you're the target of that kind of energy, it can bring bad things to your life. So like misfortune. Um, Now, what else? It might bring up fear, uncertainty, power, and joy. I love to put all four of these in a group together, because if I'm envied by others, then suddenly I have power. And I know as a racialized queer person, I'm not always comfortable with power. So now I feel fear about how I'm going to use the power or misuse it. And I'm in a social situation or a sexual situation and I feel uncertainty. How am I being experienced by the other person? Am I being experienced as forceful, as presumptuous? Um, is there expectations about my sexual performance? But maybe I experience uncertainty, and that also leads me to experience joy. I'm treading new waters, I'm experiencing new things. Concealment. How many people have gotten a promotion or taken a trip or bought something really expensive that you downplayed to someone else? And you said, oh, yeah, this is a really nice thing, but I got it on sale. Or, yeah, we went on this vacation, we saved up all year for it. Like, no one asked you to say all of those things. But there's a defensiveness that's about concealing. You want to kind of tuck away or contain the object of desire because you feel a bit ashamed. So when you're envied by others, or you think you're going to be envied by others, you might conceal the object of desire. Denial. So sometimes people will just reduce the worth of the object. So if I say I'm attracted to you, and or I'm envious that you're so attractive, you have such a cute body, you're getting all the attention, you might be overwhelmed by that and you might say, oh, I don't think I'm that attractive. I just have like normal features, or I find myself ugly. A person who doesn't struggle with being the holder of the object of envy might just say, thank you, I appreciate that. Oh, that's very sweet. I would say that you're pretty attractive too. Um, but the denial can be such a knee-jerk reaction, right? So concealment and denial are common, and they're taught to us in our culture, in our dominant North American culture, that is, as a way to deal with being the object of someone else's envy. Sometimes we do something called symbolic sharing. So if somebody says something nice to me, I say something nice to them. It's like you've by by giving me a compliment or sharing that you are envious of me in a particular way, it's like you've given me $10, and you know what? I'm just going to give you $5 back, and it feels good. But that's a symbolic sharing, right? It's not. I haven't given anything up, actually, really, because the $10 originally came from the other person. Now, sometimes when people are being envied and they're really good at managing it, and they have good politics, and they've challenged some of their own ideas of upward mobility at the expense of others, which capitalism teaches us to do. There's an opportunity for true sharing. So that means, like, hey, even if you are not, you know, you're not like the superhero on Grinder, you're not getting all the likes and taps, I see something really fantastic in you, and I want to have a date with you. Or I can see how people with different experiences should be part of my friend group, and I will approach them, and I will, if they, strike up a conversation with me, I will see things in them beyond the superficial, right? So sometimes when we redistribute resources, or we just kind of think, hey, this person has something to offer, and we think everybody has something to offer, we engage in a kind of true sharing. Now, does everyone need to do that? Not necessarily. Does it make you a bad human if you don't do that? Of course not. It's just something to think about. If you're envied by others, that means that you possess something that they want. And how do you symbolically or truly share that thing that they want? Maybe sharing is not about giving them your height or your abs or your money, but it could also be an invitation to share space with them so that you can then compliment them truly and genuinely, or appreciate them even in a sexual way around something that they have or they possess. All right, I'm going to go back to the chat box, and I'd like to give people an opportunity to share final thoughts and questions. I also would like to ask folks, if you want to hear me talk about this, or you want to share these concepts with other people, I did do a podcast interview not too long ago on a podcast called Mental Health Much. It's run by somebody named Vincent Francoeur, and you can look it up wherever you get your podcasts, or you can use the QR code to check it out. I would love for you to share some of these thoughts of envy and get those conversations going. If you want to follow me on social media, just go to ladyadavan.com. You'll see that on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can get in touch with my own podcast, my Instagram, my YouTube channel, on and so forth. I'm going to stop sharing screen, and I'd love to open up the space for conversation and dialogue. We actually have a lot of time, and we're going to end early, which is good for me because I'm in Johannesburg right now, and it's dinner time almost. Okay, so comments that I missed so far. Someone says, as a sexual educator, I guess I kind of cultivate inspiring people to envy me, at least in terms of the niche I teach, because I realize that will motivate them to take my classes. It's kind of an entrepreneur marketing 101. And yeah, it's hard to do, a weird space to occupy. You know what? I love that. I love that so much, because I think as an educator, I have a similar experience in the work world doing that kind of work. And I think I go into a performance mode, and I want to be the object of other people's envy. And then they follow my work. So a lot of us do that, right? And so that's beautiful to think about how it's not something to be scared of. It's something we incite in other people. And it can be the start of, like, it's part of our business model almost. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you saying it's a weird space to occupy, because power can make us feel uncomfortable, right? That makes sense that Someone says, I think the word envy makes me feel uncomfortable, thinking about how someone is envying me. If it was replaced with them looking up to me, then I would feel more comfortable with that, I think. Yeah, I think the word envy evokes a lot of feeling. So I would be, yeah, I think you could interchange it with, someone looking up to you. But if I think about it, maybe there's different intensities with which someone experiences envy, right? And sometimes it's benign and it's like healthy, and other times it's more malicious and contemptuous or hostile, right? So I think if we think about it on a spectrum, it might shift your comfort with the language. But if someone looks up to you, they probably look up to you because of something you possess. They want something that you have, or they want to be like you, right? So that could be physical appearance, achievements, career, um, personal qualities, etc., academic achievement, etc. So, in a way, when someone looks up to you, there's a hint of envy there, right? But the envy doesn't have to be bad, or it doesn't have to be hostile or contemptuous. Now, you've asked, so folks have asked, let's clarify the difference between envy and jealousy one more time. So, envy is usually between two people, right? It's dyadic. It's about me wanting something you possess, whereas jealousy is me fearing that I'm going to lose something, usually in a group of three. So it's when um, my boss um celebrates a peer of mine, a colleague, but not me. I might feel jealous. I could also be envious of my peer, right? So there's an overlap there. But because it's a three-person thing, I'm feeling jealous of something that they got, right? So it's about me losing something. I didn't get that. It could be in the context of a romantic relationship. I might be jealous that my partner had like, let's say we're open and he had a fun hookup with somebody else. I could be envious of that other person. I could be envious of my partner, but likely I'm going to feel jealousy that the other person took something from me. He took my partner's affection and time, or he gave my partner something that I feel like I can't give him. So I feel a sense of loss about who I am in relation. So jealousy is about possession, it's about feeling like you're losing something, it's about a threat to something you already have. Envy is wanting something that somebody else possesses. So this might take a while to wrap your head around, but hopefully some of this has been helpful. There's a couple of other questions in the chat box. So someone is asking, what is a good way to invite a close person, family, friend, or lover to speak about envy together? I'm realizing just how taboo this topic is. Well, that's a good question. Sometimes I won't use the word envy specifically. I might say so let's go with family, for example. I might say to a sibling, hey, we were at that family gathering and people they were really paying a lot of attention to this thing that I accomplished or something that happened in my life. And how did that make you feel? I was a bit unsure, a bit worried that, you were being overlooked because you've done some great things too. And it might open up a window for them to talk about that. If it's with a lover, I might say, if I'm the one who's experiencing the envy, or they are, depending on which direction it's going in, the conversation will look different. So if I sense that they're feeling envious of me, I might say, hey, there's things about, like, we've got different lives and we look different in the world. And I'm just wondering, like, what feelings does that bring up for you? Because I just want to be aware of it. Some of it's obviously going to be for you to manage, but as your partner, it's good for me to know because I don't want to do things that make you feel bad. That doesn't feel good for me. If I envy something in my partner, I might just say, like the wild sex life you've had, or you being able to bottom on command, or you having access to like these friendship networks, like it brings up a kind of envy for me. Like, I wish I had that. Or maybe it brings up jealousy for me because I feel like those people get more of you than I do. And so maybe there's a need that follows that. And the need would be, sometimes I think to help me manage my envy, I just need some reassurance that you're still here, that you're still into me. You're bringing out my anxiety, my anxious attachment, and I need a bit more reassurance. So that might be how I would go about doing that. Um, any more comments or questions in the chat box? All right. Once again, I'm going to invite you to follow me on my socials at lady@event.com. We are ending early today, about half hour early, so I apologize if people wanted something longer this morning. But I am so honored to have been back here to Sex Down South. By next year, I hope to be there in person teaching a class, and I'm currently working on 2 books here in Johannesburg. One of them is called Seeking: Stories from a Gay Therapist, Making Sense of Connection and Relationships. Of course, I'm going to talk about envy and shame. And the other book is called Same Labels, Different Determinants. It's a workbook for queer guys into guys it's a workbook that people want to use with their own therapists or on their own, where they talk about different determinants of their own mental health. So things like aging, shame, coming out, family acceptance, etc. So keep a lookout for those things. And please, please, please fill out the workshop evaluation. It's important for the planning committee to know what they could be doing better. It's important for me to know where I've missed the mark and what I could be doing better. So thanks again for having me, and take care, folks. Bye.